Many of you have probably heard the word goon before, and if you've ever seen the movie Goon, you might know exactly what I'm talking about. In this movie, there's the main character who is strictly on a hockey team for fighting, and he gets paid to fight. Now, if you've ever gone to a real professional hockey game, you'll see that most of these teams, some have gotten away from it nowadays, but most of these teams have a goon or a guy that likes to fight and hit. Now, fighting has been a part of the game of hockey ever since it came around. And my career of playing hockey, I've seen many fights from the time I was this big and 10 until all the way up till high school and even in like men's league and stuff that I play now. And I've been in my fair share of fights, and I'm not proud of that. But sometimes when you're out there, it just happens, and there's nothing you can really do about it. Um, so in the moment, honestly, you're not really thinking. Your adrenaline's pumping, and if I could go back, I would definitely make sure that I didn't get in those fights. Since starting hockey, I've seen firsthand how fighting can negatively affect the game, and what the consequences of fighting are. So the goal of fighting is different for everyone. Um, some people see it as important to the game. Some people see it as kind of a distraction, and that's more of what I see it as. Um, I feel as though people that know a lot about hockey itself see it as a distraction because it usually leads to, obviously, like I said, the negative consequences. Um, um, so when you fight in hockey, you get a 5 minute penalty. So this is where the saying 5 minutes for fighting comes from. You've probably heard that saying before. It's in a lot of movies. There's a band named 5 Minutes for Fighting. Things like that. It's a very common term, and usually it's seen as the cool thing to do in hockey is to fight. So in hockey, it's one of the only sports where it's just constant flow of the game and constant like ongoing. You change lines. There's not many whistles. In football and in basketball, there's a lot of whistles and back and forth stopping of action. But in hockey, it's kind of just going straight through. Now, it takes players a lot of time to get settled into the rhythm of the game, and that's important. So you'd see the first couple minutes of a hockey game usually a feeling out process almost as the same as most other sports. Once the game gets settled in more, players get a better feel for it. Although when you start to get obviously when you get into a fight, that takes away the momentum from the game, and it kind of stops for like 3 or 4 minutes. Now that can hurt. From my personal experience, that can hurt me and my teammates because if you get in a fight, you're sitting there watching the fight for 3 or 4 minutes. Obviously, the fight doesn't last that long, but you have to get things sorted after, give the players their penalties. So that kind of ruins the flow of the game, in my personal opinion. And that can kind of have major setbacks because when that player is taken off the ice for 5 minutes, it kind of ruins. Every player has their own role, and it kind of ruins the flow. So on each line, there's 3 players. If one of those players gets in a fight, that line can't really go out there anymore because they don't have their third player. So it's really important, that I feel that it's important not to get in fights so that you can keep that momentum going and keep that constant game flow going. That's my personal opinion on it. So as I said, fighting is a lot of spectators. Like most favorite parts of watching the game. If you go to, many of you probably gone to a Watertown Wolves game. There's a lot of fights in those games, and that's what they use to sell tickets. Now, that's what they need to sell tickets because that's what a lot of the fans like to go to watch. Now, I also disagree with this method of play because being a hockey fan myself and a hockey player, I like to go just to watch the hockey, not the fighting. And it can be very dangerous when all you like to do is fight and hit and try to do those sort of things. It's very bad for the game. Now, there's a high risk of an injury in hockey as it is without fighting. So that's why there's all that equipment that we wear. You got certain shin pads, you got pants, you got elbow pads, you got, shoulder pads, helmets, skates, things like that. There's a very high risk of injury as is. Now, having fighting involved in the game, that just leads to a bigger risk of injury, and it can lead to, so when you're fighting, you like to grab on to your opponent, kind of grab them by the jersey here. And what you want to try to do is you take your helmet off. Now, obviously, sometimes in a fight, your helmet doesn't get off before you start throwing punches. So that can lead to broken hands, cuts, blood everywhere. In younger levels, when kids fight, they can't take their helmets off. So they'll start punching, and they'll hit in their knuckles here, and they'll get cuts and bruises and broken hands. And it's just a bad environment for everybody to be in when you're fighting, just because the increased risk of injury. Now, at the pro level, they usually take their helmets off, they take their shoulder pads off so that they can, swing a little bit easier. And those constant blows to the head for goons, or enforcers as you might call it, they get in fights every game. And eventually, like football, the constant collisions to the head can cause trauma to the head and memory loss as time goes on. And I feel personally that it would be a lot better if they took this out of the game just to cut down on the amount of injuries. So I'm also a referee in hockey, and when I ref 18 and under kids. So these players are not allowed to take their helmets off, and we are encouraged to try to stop the fight as soon as possible. Now, if we're going in to stop a fight, that also puts us at risk of injury also, because we have to try to get in there. And usually players won't stop fighting just because we go in. So there have been times when I've got hit as a ref and we don't have much protective gear on, and it leads to risk of injury for even more than just the players. So it's kind of a selfish act almost to get in a fight. Obviously, it's a bad example also for kids. When I played high school hockey, there would always be younger kids watching, and I remember being younger also watching high school and college hockey, and I always look up to the players on the ice. And once I got to that level of high school, you realize it's not as special as you might have thought it was when you were younger. And those young players sit there and they idolize these role models out on the ice. And whatever they do, they like to try to mimic that exact thing. So if you get in a fight on the ice, those kids see that and they're thinking, oh, that's really cool. I want to do that. And that's kind of where things can start to spiral downhill. They can see, obviously, at certain teams getting more fights than others, and the kids will see that and they'll think, oh, I want to be like them. So they'll start to be more violent in their games, and it's kind of a downward spiral, as I said. It can lead to dirtier play, and it's kind of like, for example, if you played football and you see players getting encouraged to take headshots back in the day. The kids that were watching that, seeing them getting praise from coaches and fans, would think, oh, I want to make a big crushing hit like that too. And it's kind of along the same lines in hockey. It's not a good example for the kids watching. Now, what they should be seeing is just good, clean hockey, and what they should be looking forward to is playing the sport itself, not in getting violent and fighting in the game itself. So they should be, watching their role models play the game a little more fluently and skillfully instead of, using their fists to do the talking. So as I've said, fighting's been in the game a very long time, and it'll be very hard to take it out of the game right off the bat. But I think it would be important to put rules in place to get rid of fighting. As I said, it would cut down on the amount of injuries. There'll still be injuries, obviously, because that's how hockey is. But it would cut down on injuries, and it would just make the game, it would be a more safe environment, and it would be a much better atmosphere for younger kids to watch their role models play also. And in the future, it would lead to a more clean, more efficient style of play.